The fluorescent lights of the Starlight Diner hummed a weary 60-cycle dirge, a sound Clara Evans knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the soundtrack to her life, a monotonous score for days spent slinging hash browns and wiping away the sticky ghosts of maple syrup. At 24, she moved with the grim efficiency of someone who had long ago traded dreams for the brutal mathematics of survival. Her apron, a constellation of grease stains and coffee-colored nebulae, was cinched tight around a frame that perpetually ached. 5 years ago, Clara had been the star of Columbia University's East Asian Studies Department. Her mind was a vibrant tapestry woven with the intricate threads of Japanese syntax, the subtle nuances of honorifics, and the deep cultural currents that shaped a language she loved. She could hear the unspoken words, the meaning that lived in the silences between syllables. Then, her father's small construction business had collapsed under the weight of a bad contract, and the ensuing heart attack had taken him with it. He left behind a mountain of debt and a heartbroken wife, Clara's grandmother, Eleanor, who now depended on her for everything. Clara had swapped her textbooks on the Kamakura period for a notepad of daily specials, her ambitions shrinking to the size of the tip jar she emptied each night. Eleanor was the sun Clara orbited. Her grandmother's quiet strength, the way her tired eyes would light up when Clara walked through the door after a double shift, was the fuel that burned against the encroaching darkness of foreclosure notices and prescription costs. But the debt was a slow-acting poison, and Clara felt its chill in her bones every single day. It was just after 3 p.m. on a sweltering Tuesday when the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of a world utterly alien to the Starlight. Two men encased in suits of such exquisite tailoring they seemed to repel the diner's greasy air, slid into the corner booth, the one with the torn vinyl Clara had tried to patch with duct tape. The older man possessed a palpable gravity. His hair was a distinguished salt and pepper, and his eyes, a startlingly pale blue, swept the room with an air of bored ownership. This was Julian Croft, though the name meant nothing to Clara. He was the architect and emperor of Croft Industries, a titan of global logistics whose name was a prayer on the lips of investors and a curse on those of his rivals. Across from him sat Garrett Shaw, his chief operating officer. Younger, with a polished charm that felt manufactured, Garrett's smile never quite reached his eyes. He projected an aura of sleek competence, but a nervous energy thrummed just beneath the surface, visible in the way his fingers constantly straightened his perfectly knotted tie. "The final wire transfers are queued, Julian," Garrett said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "All compliance checks are green. Mr. Tanaka is simply waiting for the ceremonial call. He's a traditionalist." "Tradition is the bedrock of honor, Garrett," Croft replied, his voice a low baritone that cut effortlessly through the diner's clatter. "And honor is the only currency that matters in this deal. Project Sakura isn't just about expanding our shipping lanes. It's about fulfilling the promise I made to his father 20 years ago. It's legacy." "Of course," Garrett said smoothly, "a $50 billion legacy. Once he gives the final verbal assent, our Pacific presence becomes unassailable. We'll have a monopoly on the superconductor shipping routes for the next decade." "If he gives his assent," Croft corrected, a flicker of something, not doubt, but a deep-seated caution in his eyes. "Tanaka-san values respect above all. The slightest misstep, the faintest whiff of impropriety, and he will walk away without a second thought. 50 billion be damned." Clara approached the table, her pen and pad at the ready. "Afternoon, folks. What can I get for you?" she asked, her diner voice, level, polite, and entirely detached from the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. They ordered black coffee, nothing more. They weren't there for the food. They were there for the privacy that only the anonymous bustle of a place like the Starlight could offer. As Clara poured the coffee, her eyes briefly met Garrett Shaw's. He gave her a dismissive once-over, a look that categorized and filed her away as part of the scenery before turning his attention back to his boss. But in that fleeting glance, Clara noticed a small, intricate detail, a silver lapel pin in the shape of a single cherry blossom, its petals inlaid with mother-of-pearl. It was exquisite and utterly out of place on his severe dark suit. She left them to their world of legacies and logistics. For the next 30 minutes, their conversation was a low drone of terms she barely understood. Intermodal TEU allotments, blockchain manifests, port leverage. Then Garrett's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and a mask of concern fell over his features. It's the foundation, Julian. An urgent matter with the children's wing donation. I have to step outside and handle this, he said, his voice pitched with just the right amount of dutiful stress. Handle it, Croft said, waving a hand dismissively, his attention already on his own tablet. Garrett slid out of the booth and hurried toward the entrance, his voice a low, urgent hum as he took the call on the sidewalk. A few minutes later, Croft stood, leaving a $100 bill on the table for two $3 coffees. He strode out of the diner without a backward glance, expecting his COO to be waiting. The door chimed, and they were gone, two predators returning to their natural habitat of steel and glass. Clara cleared the table, her fingers closing around the crisp bill with a surge of gratitude. It was a week's worth of Eleanor's most expensive medication, a small victory, but a vital one. As she wiped the table with a damp cloth, her hand brushed against something cool and metallic on the floor. She looked down. Lying half hidden under the table's pedestal was the cherry blossom lapel pin she had admired. Garrett Shaw must have dropped it. She picked it up, its delicate weight cool in her palm. At the same moment, she saw something else on the vinyl seat, tucked into the crease where the back met the bench. A sleek, dark smartphone. Garrett had been so intent on his performance that he'd left both behind. She sighed. It was diner policy to put lost items in a cardboard box behind the counter, a purgatory for forgotten scarves and single gloves. She was about to do just that when the phone screen lit up, not with a call, but with a text message notification. It was in Japanese. Even from a distance, Clara's eyes, trained for years, caught the familiar characters. The name of the sender was Tianjong Ming-mei, Tanaka Akemi. Below it, a single line of text. She couldn't read the whole thing, but she saw the words Fu, Chi-Chi, father, and Bu-Ming-yu, Fu-Mei-yo, dishonor. A chill colder than the diner's overzealous air conditioning traced a line down her spine. Dishonor. It was the word Julian Croft had spoken with such gravity. She looked from the phone to the delicate cherry blossom pin in her other hand. This wasn't just a lost phone. It felt like a piece of a puzzle she couldn't see, a single critical note in a symphony of immense consequence. For an hour, the phone sat on the counter next to the cash register, a silent black slab of potential energy. The lunch rush faded, giving way to the lazy afternoon lull. Clara was refilling napkin dispensers when the phone began to vibrate, emitting a serene melodic chime that sounded like a wind harp. It was a sound as out of place in the starlight as a diamond on a paper plate. The screen lit up. It was a call, the same name as before. Tianjong-Ming-mei, Tanaka Akemi. The country code was +81. Japan. Her manager, Sal, a man whose personality was as greasy as the grill he commanded, had one unbreakable rule. You don't touch the customer's stuff, ever, especially not a ringing phone. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. The phone stopped ringing and the screen went dark. Clara felt a wave of relief. She'd follow the rules. She'd leave it alone. But as she reached for it to finally drop it in the lost and found box, it buzzed back to life. Akemi Tanaka was calling again. Persistent. Clara hesitated, her mind racing. A call from Japan. It would be early morning there. It had to be important. She thought of Julian Croft's words. The slightest misstep, he will walk away. She looked at the characters she'd seen in the text message. Father, dishonor. What if this was the misstep? What if the message hadn't been delivered? Against every rule, against every instinct for self-preservation that told her to stay in her lane, she swiped to answer. She held the phone to her ear, turning away from the main floor of the diner. Hello, she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was a brief pause, then a woman's voice, crisp and formal, speaking flawless, lightly accented English. I am trying to reach Mr. Garrett Shaw. May I ask who is speaking? Oh, my name is Clara. I'm a waitress at the Starlight Diner in New York. Mr. Shaw was here. He must have forgotten his phone. Another pause, this one longer, colder. Clara could almost hear the gears turning, the recalculation happening thousands of miles away. The sterile silence of a Tokyo high-rise office hummed in the background. I see, the voice said, a sudden frost creeping into her tone. That is inconvenient. My name is Akemi Tanaka. I am the executive assistant and daughter of Mr. Kenji Tanaka, chairman of Tanaka Heavy Industries. The name landed in Clara's mind like a lit match. Tanaka. This was it. This was the deal. Can you take a message for Mr. Shaw? Akemi continued, her voice a mask of impenetrable courtesy. Of course, Clara said, grabbing a guest check and a pen. Go ahead. Please inform Mr. Shaw, and by extension Mr. Croft, that Tanaka-san has spent the evening in deep reflection. Akemi's words were chosen with surgical precision. He has come to understand that the foundations upon which Project Sakura were built are not as solid as he was led to believe. There are discrepancies, matters of profound corporate disrespect that have recently come to his attention. Clara's pen hovered over the paper. This wasn't a business message, it was a diplomatic communiqué, heavy with unspoken meaning. Please convey that he finds it impossible to proceed with tomorrow's ceremonial call. The trust has been irrevocably broken. He considers the negotiations terminated, effective immediately. He wishes Mr. Croft clarity in his future endeavors. And then, just before she hung up, Akemi switched to Japanese, her voice dropping to a tone of ice and steel. Fuha rikiri muno no yosha shinai, kao ni gyara wo furareta. Chichi wa uragiri mono o yoshanai, kago ni doro o nurareta. The line went dead. Clara stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The diner's familiar sounds faded into a distant roar. Her mind, fluent in the subtleties of the language, translated the Japanese sentence with brutal clarity. It wasn't a business sign-off. It was a curse. My father does not forgive betrayers. We have had mud smeared on our faces. This wasn't a cancellation. It was a declaration of war. A $50 billion deal hadn't just fallen through. It had been killed, executed on the grounds of a profound personal insult. And Clara Evans, a waitress from the Starlight Diner, was the only person in the Western Hemisphere who knew the truth. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over Clara. Her mind, the one that used to effortlessly parse complex linguistic theories, was now a frantic scramble of catastrophic possibilities. She had to find them. She had to get this phone, this ticking bomb, back to Garrett Shaw or Julian Croft. She rushed to the diner's front window, peering out at the river of yellow cabs and anonymous pedestrians on Lexington Avenue. They were gone, vanished into the vast, indifferent city. Sal, those two guys in the suits, did you see where they went? She asked, her voice tight with an urgency Sal had never heard from her before. Black car, big one. Looked like a damn spaceship, Sal grunted, not looking up from his racing form. Who cares? You got a 2-top on table 5 wants a check pronto. A black car, of course. They hadn't hailed a cab. They had descended from another planet and had now returned to it. Finding them felt impossible. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was she supposed to do? Leave the phone in the box? The message, the real, devastating message spoken in Japanese, would die with it. Call the police? They'd tell her to drop it at the nearest precinct and would never grasp the urgency. She retreated to the cramped employee break room, a windowless cell that smelled of bleach and despair. She stared at the phone. It was locked, mocking her with a simple passcode screen. That single barrier of 4 digits separated her from any chance of contacting its owner. This was the precipice. To violate a stranger's privacy was a line she would never normally dream of crossing. But Akemi Tanaka's final, venomous words echoed in her head. My father does not forgive betrayers. She thought of Croft's earnestness when he spoke of legacy and honor. She thought of the $50 billion deal that employed thousands of people. The stakes were astronomical, far beyond the simple matter of a lost item. Taking a shaky breath, she began to think. A passcode wasn't just random numbers. It was a reflection of the person, Garrett Shaw. He struck her as arrogant, meticulous, and obsessed with status. She tried the obvious. 1234. Incorrect. 0100. Incorrect. She thought about his sleek, polished persona. What would a man like that value? She remembered the lapel pin, the cherry blossom. Sakura. How would that translate to a keypad? She tried spelling it out with the corresponding numbers. 72872. Too long. Her mind was a blank wall. Time was slipping away. Croft and Shaw were operating under the assumption that everything was fine. They were probably preparing for a victory celebration for a deal that was already a smoking crater. She had to think not like a waitress, but like she used to, analytically, methodically. She closed her eyes, picturing the man, Garrett Shaw, his suit, his perfect tie, the dismissive look in his eyes. He was a man who believed in power, in control. Her eyes fell to the phone's lock screen wallpaper, barely visible behind the number pad. It was an abstract design of sharp, intersecting lines. But as she tilted the phone, she saw it wasn't abstract at all. It was a stylized kanji character. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew it instantly. Li. It was the character for Chikara, power, strength. It was so perfectly, arrogantly him. Her finger trembled as she traced the character's form on the keypad. The two simple strokes of the character would correspond to a pattern, a short horizontal stroke at the top, a longer one, bending down. Maybe 1 to 3, then 7 to 4? No, it was too complex. What if it was simpler? What if it was just the number of strokes? 2. No. What if it was the Joyo grade level? Grade 1. No. Then it hit her. It wasn't about the character itself, but its representation in the digital world. The JIS code, the character code used in computing. She didn't know the exact number, but it was a long shot. She fumbled for her own cheap, cracked smartphone and quickly searched for JIS code for Chikara kanji. The result flashed on her screen. 386 Li, Liang. The code was 3865. With a surge of adrenaline, she typed it in. 3865. Click. The phone unlocked. A wave of vertigo swept over her. She was in. The phone's home screen was a sterile grid of corporate apps, secure messaging platforms, stock tickers, encrypted email clients. It felt like holding the master key to a forbidden kingdom. Her conscience screamed at her to look for a contact number and nothing else. She went straight to the calendar. A single entry was marked for that evening at 8:01 p.m., highlighted in bold red. Project Sakura, final toast, the Oak Room. They were celebrating tonight, completely oblivious. She had to warn them. But how? She couldn't just walk into the Oak Room and ask for Julian Croft. She scanned the apps again, her eyes landing on one called Vault. It had a simple lock icon. Her instincts told her this was more than just a standard app. She tapped it, and it asked for another password. This was a dead end. Defeated, she went to the email app. It was a sea of corporate jargon, but one email chain, with the subject line Tanaka dossier, caught her eye. It was from an encrypted, untraceable address. She opened it. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a dossier on Tanaka. It was a collection of files for Tanaka. There were PDFs of falsified environmental impact reports for Croft's shipping fleet, making it look like the company was hiding massive violations. There were doctored financial statements, subtly altered to suggest a slush fund for bribing port officials. The final attachment was an audio file named JC Private Remarks MP3. With a shaking hand, she tapped it. A voice filled the tiny break room, a voice that was almost, but not quite, Julian Croft's. It was a deep fake, but an incredibly sophisticated one. The synthesized voice was laughing, speaking in English, but peppered with condescending, poorly pronounced Japanese phrases. And old man Tanaka, the fake voice sneered. He'll sign anything as long as you bow deep enough. He thinks this is about honor. It's about me gutting his father's legacy for parts and selling them to the Chinese. The old fool will be my greatest conquest. It was a character assassination, a perfectly crafted piece of corporate espionage designed to inflict the maximum possible insult. It accused Croft of the one thing he held sacred, desecrating a legacy. The email chain showed that these files had been forwarded from this phone, Garrett Shaw's phone, to an anonymous intermediary an hour before Akemi Tanaka's call. Garrett hadn't been receiving a warning. He had been delivering the poison. He wasn't the loyal COO. He was the betrayer, the Urajiramono. Clara now understood everything. Garrett had orchestrated the entire thing. He had crafted the perfect lie, a lie that confirmed a traditionalist's worst fears about greedy American corporations. He had used his own phone as the delivery system and then accidentally left it behind to create an alibi, a perfect picture of a man blindsided by tragedy. He had likely even engineered the urgent call about the foundation as a piece of theater. The cherry blossom pin, it must have been a gift from the Tanakas, dropped on purpose to add another layer of cruel irony. But what could she do? Who would ever believe her? She was a waitress, and he was the COO of a multi-billion-dollar company. It was her word against his, her life against his. She looked at the phone, at the damning evidence it contained. She couldn't email it to anyone. It would be dismissed as a hoax. She couldn't call the police. This wasn't a crime they could understand. She looked at the calendar entry again. The Oak Room, 8 p.m. It was 7:15 p.m. She had one chance, one insane, desperate, potentially life-ruining chance. She couldn't get to Julian Croft through his corporate armor, but tonight he would be at a restaurant. He would be in a public place, vulnerable. If she could just get to him, if she could just get him to listen. She looked down at her stained apron and worn-out sneakers. Then she looked at the silver lapel pin still clutched in her hand. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of the honor Garrett had sought to destroy. It was her ticket in. For the first time in 5 years, since the day she'd packed up her dorm room at Columbia, a fire she thought had long been extinguished flickered to life within her. It was the fire of conviction, the fierce, defiant belief that the truth mattered. She tore off her apron and threw it in the corner. She walked out of the break room, past a stunned Sal who was yelling something about table 5. She didn't hear him. The only sound in her ears was the ticking of a clock, counting down the last precious minutes before a $50 billion lie became immutable fact. The city was a smear of neon and brake lights as the taxi hurtled towards Midtown. Clara's entire net worth was bleeding away with every tick of the meter, but she didn't care. The only currency that mattered now was time. She clutched Garrett's phone in one hand and the cool, delicate cherry blossom pin in the other. They were her only weapons. The Oak Room was not a place, it was a statement. Housed in a legendary hotel, its cavernous, wood-paneled interior whispered of old money and quiet power. Men with invisible crowns and women dripping with understated jewels spoke in low, confident tones. It was a world away from the clatter and grease of the Starlight Diner. Clara, in her faded jeans and worn-out t-shirt, was an anomaly, a glitch in the opulent matrix. The maitre d', a man who seemed carved from a block of polished condescension, materialized before her, his body a human barrier. "May I help you?" he asked, his eyes flicking over her attire with surgical disdain. "I need to see Julian Croft. It's an emergency," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Croft is in a private dining room. He is not to be disturbed," the man said, the finality in his tone like a closing door. "Please," she insisted, her desperation starting to fray the edges of her composure. "You don't understand. It's a matter of extreme urgency regarding his Japanese partners." The maitre d's expression didn't soften. "I have my instructions. If you do not leave, I will have to call security." This was it. The wall. She had come all this way only to be stopped by a man in a tuxedo. But then her eyes fell to the cherry blossom pin in her palm. It was a symbol of honor, of respect. She had to use their language. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and met the maitre d's gaze. She performed a slight, respectful bow, a gesture completely alien in this setting. "Please convey a message to Croft-san," she said, her voice low and clear. "Tell him a messenger has arrived to return the fallen Sakura of Tanaka-san. Tell him it is a matter of saving face. Kao Otadaru." The use of the Japanese honorific and the specific, culturally loaded phrase gave the maitre d' pause. He saw not a disruptive vagrant, but someone with knowledge, someone who understood the rules of a different, more intricate game. The word Tanaka was the key. He stared at her for a long moment, his internal calculus whirring. "Wait here," he commanded, and disappeared through a set of imposing oak doors. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every second felt like an hour. She could feel the stares of the other patrons, burning into her back. Finally, the maitre d' returned, his expression now one of grudging bewilderment. "Mr. Croft will grant you 2 minutes. Follow me." He led her through the main dining room to a private chamber at the back. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Julian Croft stood at the head of a long table, surrounded by 5 other executives. And sitting to Croft's right, a triumphant, predatory gleam in his eyes, was Garrett Shaw. The moment Garrett saw her, his face, which had been a mask of feigned sympathy and concern, contorted into a snarl of pure fury. "You!" he hissed, rising from his chair. "What in God's name are you doing here? Security!" "That's enough, Garrett," Croft commanded, his voice like cracking ice. He turned his piercing blue eyes on Clara. "You have 2 minutes to explain this circus." Clara's throat was dry. The combined force of the powerful men staring at her was a physical pressure, but the sight of Garrett's panicked rage gave her strength. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "my name is Clara Evans. I'm a waitress at the diner you were in this afternoon." Mr. Shaw left his phone. "She stole my phone," Garrett exploded. "She's obviously some kind of corporate spy or a shakedown artist." "Julian, this is a security breach of the highest order." "I didn't steal it," Clara said, her voice gaining strength as she held Croft's gaze. "I answered it. It was a call from Akemi Tanaka." The room went silent. Every eye was on her. "She told me the deal was off," Clara continued. "She said it was because of matters of profound corporate disrespect. And then she said something in Japanese." Clara looked directly at Garrett. She said, "My father does not forgive betrayers. We have had mud smeared on our faces." A flicker of genuine shock crossed Garrett's face before he masked it with indignation. He knew she shouldn't have been able to understand that. "This is insane," he blustered, turning to Croft. "She's making this up. A waitress who happens to speak perfect Japanese? It's absurd. She's clearly been hired by a competitor to sabotage us at the 11th hour." This was the critical moment. Croft was a pragmatist, a man who dealt in facts and figures, not in the wild tales of waitresses. His expression was a mask of stone, his mind weighing the probabilities. Garrett's accusation was logical. Clara's story was fantastic. "What proof do you have?" Croft asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It's on his phone," Clara said, holding up the device. "But it's not what you think. The disrespect the Tanakas are talking about, it wasn't from you, Mr. Croft. It was manufactured. It was a lie sent from this phone." Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A lie? And you uncovered this grand conspiracy in a few hours from a diner break room?" "Julian, for God's sake, look at her. Are you really going to listen to this? This nobody over me? Your COO? The man who has been by your side for 15 years? He stepped towards Clara, his face a mask of contempt. He was trying to intimidate her, to humiliate her, to reduce her to nothing more than her stained t-shirt and cheap jeans in the eyes of his powerful boss. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, little girl," he sneered, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. "You are a bug on the windshield of history. I'm going to have you arrested and sue you into oblivion. You will be paying my legal fees for the rest of your miserable life." Clara didn't flinch. She met his gaze, and in that moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the woman who had deciphered the hidden meaning in a coded call, unlocked a fortress of lies, and crossed a city to stand in the belly of the beast. She turned her back on him, addressing only Julian Croft. "Mr. Shaw is right about one thing," she said calmly. "It does seem absurd. Why would you believe me? But ask yourself this, Mr. Croft. The final insulting evidence against you was an audio file, a recording of your voice." Croft's eyes narrowed. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I heard it," Clara said, "and it was a masterful fake. But it made one mistake. In the recording, your voice says the Japanese phrase for old fool is Orakana Rojin. It's a literal clumsy translation. Anyone who has spent real time with Japanese speakers, especially someone as traditional as Tanaka-san, knows that a true native speaker would use a more nuanced, context-specific insult. The cadence was wrong. The cultural grammar was non-existent. It was an American's idea of a Japanese insult. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Now ask Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice dropping, "who has been taking private Japanese lessons for the last 6 months, specifically focusing on business honorifics and etiquette to better serve the Tanaka partnership. Ask him what he's learned." The trap was sprung. Every head in the room swiveled to Garrett Shaw. Julian Croft's gaze was no longer merely skeptical. It was analytical, dissecting, and utterly terrifying. He had a deep, personal relationship with the Tanaka family. He knew Clara was right about the linguistic details. It was a small thing, an infinitesimal crack in the facade, but it was enough. Garrett's face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty gray mask of pure panic. He had been so proud of his secret lessons, seeing them as the final tool he needed to manipulate both sides. He never imagined they could be used as a weapon against him. I don't know what she's talking about," he stammered, his polished charm shattering into 1,000 pieces. "My lessons were to show respect." "Unlock the phone, Garrett," Croft said. His voice was no longer loud, but a whisper that carried more menace than any roar. I won't," Garrett sputtered. "This is a violation of my privacy." "Unlock it, now!" Garrett's hands were shaking as he took the phone from Clara. He thumbed the code was a key turning a lock in the universe. 386-5. Click. It took Julian Croft precisely 47 seconds to navigate the phone's interface. He moved with a chilling, predatory economy of motion, his fingers tapping the glass screen with the finality of a judge's gavel. The other executives at the table seemed to shrink into their bespoke suits, becoming mere spectators to a seismic event. Garrett, on the other hand, appeared to be coming apart at the seams, the confident architecture of his persona collapsing into a ruin of trembling limbs and ragged breasts. Croft found the Vault app. He didn't need to ask for the password again. His tech chief, a man who had been silently observing from the end of the table, leaned forward and spoke in a low, deferential tone. His tertiary encryption standard is Vantage 2028, the ticker symbol for our primary competitor and the year he projected a successful hostile takeover. The information landed in the silent room with the weight of a coffin lid. It was a detail so brazen, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it was more damning than any financial ledger. Croft's fingers typed the password. The vault opened, and there it was. Not just a plan, but a legacy of treason. The raw, unaltered audio files of Croft's private conversations, meticulously cataloged and dated, the source material for the deepfake, a detailed strategy for shorting Croft Industries stock, timed to the millisecond the Tanaka news would break, encrypted communications with board members at Vantage Logistics, promising them key shipping lanes and technology patents. It was the complete, unvarnished anatomy of a betrayal 15 years in the making. Julian Croft did not look up for a long time. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thin and suffocating. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of power, but the profound, echoing emptiness of a void. When he finally raised his head, the fury was gone from his eyes. It had been burned away, leaving behind something far more terrifying. A calm, desolate clarity. The look was not one of rage at a subordinate, but of a king gazing upon the trusted brother who had just slid a knife between his ribs. "Get out." The words were not shouted. They were two chips of ice dropped into the frozen silence. Garrett Shaw, a man who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, simply crumpled. A choked, animal sound escaped his throat. He looked at Croft, his eyes pleading not for forgiveness, but for a return to a reality that no longer existed. Two of the other executives, their faces set like stone, rose without a word. They took Garrett by each arm, their grips firm but without malice. It was an execution of a corporate sentence. As they pulled him from the room, Garrett's head swiveled, his gaze locking onto Clara. The hatred in his eyes was a physical thing, a shard of black glass aimed at her heart. It was the primal fury of a predator whose kill had been stolen not by a stronger rival, but by an insect it had never even bothered to notice. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, muffling his strangled protests. The sound was unnervingly final. The immediate aftermath was not chaos, but a strange, suspended moment of shock. Julian Croft remained motionless, staring at the closed doors as if he could still see the ghost of the man who had just passed through them. He finally moved, placing the phone on the table with a quiet click. He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. He had built an empire on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves, to see the hidden currents beneath the surface of any deal. And he had seen nothing. Clara felt like a phantom, an intruder in a sacred space of grief. She had done what she came to do. Her part was over. She was a waitress, a messenger. These were not her people. This was not her world. She began to back away toward the door, a slow, silent retreat, hoping to dissolve back into the city's anonymity. Stop. The word was quiet, but it anchored her to the floor. Croft looked up, his pale blue eyes finally focusing on her, truly seeing her. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a man who looked profoundly, deeply tired. Don't go, he said again. He gestured to the chair beside him, the one Garrett had just vacated. It felt like a violation to sit there, like stepping into a fresh grave. But she did. The remaining executives, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, quietly excused themselves, melting out of the room until only the two of them remained, surrounded by the glittering debris of shattered crystal and the invisible wreckage of trust. He said nothing for what felt like an eternity, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the wood grain on the table. He has a son, Croft said, his voice a low rasp. I'm his godfather. Last Christmas, we built a model of the Shokaku, the Japanese aircraft carrier, together. His son. He has my eyes, people say. He finally looked at Clara, and his own eyes were filled with a bewildering mix of pain and intellectual curiosity. You exposed 15 years of meticulously planned betrayal in less than 5 hours, with a payphone and a guest check. Explain that to me. The question wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine, desperate plea for understanding. I didn't expose a plan, Clara said softly, her voice barely a whisper in the cavernous room. I just listened to the words. The insult in the audio file, the one Garrett created, it was grammatically correct, but culturally empty. It was a machine's translation of an insult. Akemi Tanaka's words to me over the phone, they weren't about a contract. They were about shame, about a wound to the soul of her family. Garrett understood the business. He never understood the language. That was his mistake. Croft nodded slowly, absorbing her words not as data, but as a kind of bitter wisdom. The language, he repeated, honor, legacy, the things I thought were the foundation of the deal. He saw them as weaknesses to be exploited, and I let him. He pushed himself away from the table and walked to the room's large window, which overlooked the glittering, indifferent lights of the city. He stood with his back to her. The deal is gone, you know, he said, his voice flat. What you did tonight, it was an act of profound integrity. But in the world of consequence, it changes nothing. The insult was delivered. The damage is absolute. Tanaka will never take my calls again. Project Sakura is a $50 billion ghost. Clara felt a surprising pang of disappointment. Not for the deal, but for the failure of the truth to heal the wound it had exposed. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. He turned back from the window, a new, colder light in his eyes. The wounded man was receding, and the Emperor was returning. You haven't changed the outcome, but you have changed the war. I was fighting a ghost. Now I know the enemy's name. That is a gift of incalculable value. He walked back to the table and retrieved a pen and a business card from his jacket. He wrote a number on the back. My private cell, he said, sliding it across the table to her. A car will be waiting for you downstairs. Go home, Ms. Evans. Get some sleep. I will be in contact with you tomorrow. We have a great deal more to discuss. It was a dismissal, but it was also a promise. The ride home in the silent, leather-scented town car was a dislocating dream. Clara stared out the window as the opulent grandeur of Midtown bled into the familiar, weary streets of her own neighborhood. She felt suspended between two realities, no longer belonging entirely to either. She walked into her small apartment to find the lights dim and her grandmother asleep in her armchair, a book resting in her lap. Clara gently took the book, placed a blanket over Eleanor's shoulders, and went to her own room. She sat on the edge of her bed, the city's distant hum a familiar lullaby. In her hand, she still clutched the cherry blossom lapel pin. She had forgotten to give it back to him. She opened her palm and stared at it. The fallen sakura of Tanaka-san, a symbol of a broken promise. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window until the first gray light of dawn began to silhouette the fire escapes and water towers, her mind a turbulent sea of Japanese honorifics and corporate espionage. The sun was fully up when her own cheap smartphone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered, her heart pounding. It was Croft. His voice was crisp, devoid of the previous night's raw emotion. "Are you available to meet in 1 hour?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "A car is on its way." The car took her not to a gleaming office tower, but to a discreet brownstone in the West Village. A severe-looking woman in a gray suit led her through the house to a library in the back. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes on history, philosophy, and art. Julian Croft stood by a fireplace, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked older than he had the night before. "Coffee?" he offered. She nodded, and he poured it himself. "I spent the night dismantling Garrett's life," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "The authorities have been alerted. His assets are frozen. His contacts at Vantage have been informed of his duplicity. He will not trouble us again." He handed her a cup. "I also spent the night researching you." Clara felt a chill. "Columbia, East Asian Studies. Top of your class for 2 years. Thesis proposal was on the linguistic evolution of honorifics in the Meiji Restoration. Then you vanished, dropped out. No explanation in the university records." He looked at her, his gaze direct and unsparing. "I know about your father, the business, the debt, your grandmother. I know what you sacrificed." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. She felt exposed, her life laid bare on a table for his inspection. "I am not telling you this to invade your privacy," he continued, his voice softening slightly. "I am telling you this because I need you to understand that I know who you are. You are not a waitress who got lucky. You are a scholar who was forced into exile. The mind that unraveled Garrett's treason was not forged in a diner. It was forged at Columbia, and it was sharpened by 5 years of brutal necessity." He sat in a leather armchair opposite her. "I told you last night that the deal was dead. I was wrong. It is not dead. It is in a state of mortal dishonor. And there is only one way to address such a wound. Not with lawyers or contracts, but with an act of profound, unambiguous sincerity." "Say ye, I believe you called it." He leaned forward. "I cannot approach Tanaka. To him, I am the face of the insult. But the insult was delivered by a snake, a betrayer. The Japanese have a concept for this, do they not? A loyal retainer discovering a plot against his lord?" "Chushin," Clara said, the word coming to her lips unbidden. "A loyal retainer." "But I'm not—" "You are," he interrupted. "You, a complete stranger, showed more loyalty to the principle of my honor than the man I called my brother. And that is a story Tanaka-san will understand." He paused. "I want you to be my envoy." Clara stared at him, bewildered. "Your envoy? To do what?" "To return something that was lost." He gestured to her hand, which was still unconsciously clenched in her lap. She opened it. The cherry blossom pin lay gleaming on her palm. "That pin was a gift from Tanaka's father to my own, 50 years ago, a symbol of their company's founding promise. Garrett stole it from a display case in my office. He dropped it in your diner to add a layer of poetic cruelty to his betrayal, the symbol of our friendship left in the dirt. I want you to go to Tokyo. I want you to request a meeting with Akemi Tanaka. You will not mention the deal. You will not make excuses. You will simply tell her the story of what happened and you will return the Sakura to its rightful home. You will be the bearer of the truth. It was an insane, impossible request, a diplomatic mission of immense delicacy entrusted to a 24-year-old waitress. Why me? She breathed. You have teams of people, diplomats. Because my people see this as a collapsed deal. You see it as a smeared face. They speak the language of contracts. You speak the language of honor. They are the wrong tool for this job. You are the only one. He named a sum for this single task that would clear every cent of her family's debt and secure Eleanor's future for the rest of her life. This is not a job offer, Miss Evans. It is a request, a plea. 1 week later, Clara stood in a quiet, minimalist reception area on the top floor of the Tanaka Heavy Industries headquarters in Tokyo. She wore a simple dark suit Croft's people had provided, but in her soul, she still wore her diner apron. She had been granted a 10-minute meeting with Akemi Tanaka. Akemi entered the room, her expression as unreadable as a polished stone. She was the epitome of grace and control. She did not offer to shake hands. Clara began, speaking in formal, respectful Japanese. She did not use notes. She simply told a story. She spoke of the diner, the humming lights, the two men in suits. She described the lost phone, the accidental call. She relayed Akemi's own devastating words, and then she explained what she had discovered: the deep fake, the doctored files, the planned sabotage by a man Croft had trusted implicitly. Throughout her narrative, Akemi's expression did not change, but Clara, attuned to the silences between words, could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. When she finished, she opened a small, silk-lined box. Inside, the mother-of-pearl cherry blossom rested on a bed of black velvet. Croft-san did not send me to save his deal, Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. He sent me because the honor of his company was poisoned by a man who was like a brother to him. He cannot undo the insult, but he asked me to return this to you as a testament to the truth, to show that the foundation of friendship your fathers built was not what was broken. It was betrayed. She slid the box across the table. Akemi Tanaka looked at the pin for a long time. Then she looked at Clara. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her features. You risked a great deal for a man you do not know, she said in English. He listened to me, Clara replied simply. Akemi closed the box. Thank you for returning what was lost, Evan-san. My father will be informed. The meeting was over. Clara flew back to New York feeling that she had failed. She had delivered the message, but the wall of silence had remained. She reported to Croft, who listened intently and simply nodded. You did what I asked, was all he said. He had the promised funds transferred to her account that day. Her family was safe. Her debt was gone. She was free, and she had never felt more lost. She went back to the Starlight Diner 2 days later and picked up a shift. The familiar weight of the apron, the smell of coffee and frying bacon, the weary hum of the lights, it was all comfortingly real. Sal grunted a hello. The regulars asked where she'd been. She fell back into the rhythm of it, a ghost haunting her own life. She was clearing table 5 when the bell above the door chimed. Julian Croft walked in and sat down in the corner booth, the one with the torn vinyl. He was alone. Clara walked over, a coffee pot in her hand. Afternoon. What can I get for you? She asked, her diner voice back in place. He smiled, a genuine tired smile. Black coffee, he said, and a conversation. She poured the coffee and sat down opposite him, the way he had in the private room at the Oak Room. I received a call this morning, he said, from Kenji Tanaka. It was a difficult call. He told me the trust between our companies may take a generation to rebuild. He told me Project Sakura, as it was, is finished. Clara's heart sank. But, Croft continued, leaning forward, he also told me that honor, once lost, can only be restored through a sincere and difficult journey. He has invited me to Kyoto next spring for the Cherry Blossom Festival. Not as a business partner, but as the son of his father's friend. To talk. It is a beginning. He took a sip of his coffee. He said he was impressed by the quality of my messenger. Clara felt a slow warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of understanding being met. "Your debt is paid," Croft said, his tone shifting. "Your grandmother's care is secured. You have no more obligations. So I have a question for you, Clara Evans. Not as my employee, not as my envoy, but as the most formidable mind I have encountered in a decade. What do you want to do now?" Clara looked around the diner. The humming lights, the sticky tables, the life that had been both her prison and her sanctuary for 5 long years. She had traded her dreams for this reality, but now she was no longer bound to it. She could go anywhere, do anything. The vastness of that freedom was almost as terrifying as the debt had been. She thought of her textbooks, of the beauty and complexity of the language she loved. She thought of the thrill she had felt in the Oak Room, not of power, but of clarity, of seeing the truth when no one else could. "I want to finish what I started," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I want to go back to school. I want my degree." Croft nodded as if he had expected this answer all along. "Columbia's graduate program at the School of International and Public Affairs is the best in the country. A full scholarship has been endowed in your name. Beginning this fall, all expenses covered. It is not a gift. It is an investment." He slid a folder across the table. "And this is a pre-signed contract. It activates the day you graduate. Director of Cultural Strategy and Pacific Affairs, Croft Industries. The work of rebuilding the relationship with Tanaka will take years. It will require a new kind of language, a new kind of bridge. I want the person who laid the first stone to be the one who designs it." He stood up, leaving a $100 bill on the table. "This isn't a reward for what you did, Clara," he said, his piercing eyes holding hers. "It's a recognition of who you are. Don't ever let anyone, including yourself, mistake you for a waitress again, unless, of course, that's what you choose to be." He turned and walked out, the bell above the door chiming his departure. Clara sat alone in the corner booth, the folder in front of her, the smell of cheap coffee in the air. The fluorescent lights still hummed their weary 60-cycle dirge, but for the first time, she heard it not as the soundtrack to a dead end, but as the quiet, steady rhythm of a life just beginning. The future was no longer a wall, but a language she was finally ready to speak.